Good evening, Africa. Good evening, beautiful people of Africa. I'm here this evening with a world-shocking news that's going to shake the world. This news is coming out straight from your number one trusted online source for your credible information. Talk of Africa 3-6. So, ladies and gentlemen, patriots of Africa, and citizens of the world watching with astonishment, tonight we bring you breaking news that will forever shift the balance of power on our continent. Burkina Faso, once underestimated, once dismissed by colonial powers as fragile and weak, has unleashed a transformation so thunderous that it echoes from the deserts of the Sahel to the capitals of Europe. The headlines are blazing, and history is being written before our very eyes. Burkina Faso's military has skyrocketed into a new era, armed and fortified with advanced Turkish and Chinese weapons systems. This is not a mere purchase of rifles or trucks. No, this is an arsenal that redefines strategy, power, and sovereignty. We are talking about long-range drones from Turkey capable of striking with precision across borders. We are talking about armored vehicles, missile defense systems, state-of-the-art radar technology, and next-generation tanks flowing in from China. We are talking about the merging of two great partners, Turkey and China, fueling the rise of a nation that dares to say no to Western dominance. Burkina Faso, under the fearless leadership of Captain Ibrahim, is no longer just defending its borders. It is building a shield for Africa. It is becoming the guardian of sovereignty in the Sahel, the fortress of resistance against exploitation, and the spearhead of a pan-African revolution. Think about this carefully. For decades, Africa was deliberately kept weak. Colonialism stripped us of resources, and neo-colonialism ensured we could never defend ourselves. Outdated weapons, donated equipment, empty promises of aid, that was the story. Our soldiers were brave, our people resilient, but our weapons outdated, and the West made sure it stayed that way. They wanted us dependent, they wanted us vulnerable. But now the tide has turned. Turkey, with its booming defense industry, and China, with its unmatched industrial might, have joined hands with Burkina Faso, providing not scraps, not second-hand tools, but cutting-edge military technology. The symbolism is powerful. Africa does not have to beg anymore. Africa does not have to wait. Africa is rising, with partners who respect sovereignty and who understand that the continent must defend itself on its own terms. Let the West tremble, because for the first time, a land they thought would forever be subjugated now holds weapons that rival theirs. For the first time, the Sahel is not a playground for foreign militaries, it is a stronghold for African pride. Tonight, we break down what this $25 billion defense transformation means for Burkina Faso, for Mali, for Niger, for the entire continent. We will examine how drones from Ankara are reshaping the battlefield, how Chinese tanks will patrol African borders, how radar systems will give Burkina Faso eyes in the sky, and how this partnership is not just about defense but about dignity, technology transfer, and the rebirth of African sovereignty. Make no mistake, this is not just a military story. It is political, it is economic, it is cultural. It is about a nation that was written off as poor and powerless standing tall and declaring, "We are not prey, we are protectors." And as the sun sets over Ouagadougou tonight, one message roars across the world. Burkina Faso is no longer vulnerable. Burkina Faso is no longer waiting for permission. Burkina Faso, armed with Turkish precision and Chinese strength, is rewriting the rules of African defense and forcing the world to recognize that the era of African weakness is over. Brothers and sisters, let us pause for a moment and understand the sheer magnitude of what has just unfolded. Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation in the heart of West Africa, long dismissed by the so-called great powers as insignificant, is now commanding the attention of every intelligence agency. Every military strategist and every geopolitical observer from Washington to Paris, from Brussels to London. Why? Because in the quiet halls of Ankara and Beijing, agreements were signed that will change the course of African history. Agreements that bring into Burkina Faso's arsenal long-range Bayraktar drones from Turkey, the very same that stunned the world in conflicts from Libya to Ukraine. Agreements that deliver Chinese VT-4 tanks, HQ-9 air defense systems, and JY-27 radar installations, the very kind of technology once thought impossible for an African nation to wield independently. Agreements that ensure training, maintenance, and technology transfer, not dependency, but empowerment. This is a leap, not a step, not a crawl, a leap. For too long, Burkina Faso's soldiers have fought with unmatched bravery but outdated weapons. They battled terrorists armed with Western-funded rifles. They resisted coups fueled by foreign interference, and they endured while France positioned itself as both protector and exploiter. But now, with one bold decision, Captain Ibrahim has changed the game. Let us be clear, this partnership is not charity. It is not a handout. It is a strategic alliance between equals. Turkey brings drones with wings that patrol the skies, scanning for threats before they even arise. China brings tanks that roar across the desert, reminding any invader that Africa is not defenseless. Together, they have provided Burkina Faso with the tools to defend sovereignty, safeguard resources, and protect citizens. Can you see what this means? It means no more calling Paris when an airstrike is needed. It means no more begging Washington for intelligence. It means no more waiting on the United Nations to approve peacekeeping operations that often served foreign interests more than African ones. It means Burkina Faso can act decisively, independently, and proudly. And do you know the beauty of this? It is contagious. Already, whispers are spreading through Mali, Niger, Guinea, and beyond. Leaders who once hesitated are now watching Burkina Faso rise and saying, if they can do it, why can't we? If they can break free, why not us? This is why the West is panicking, because they know that the moment one African nation proves independence is possible, the chains of dependency begin to shatter everywhere. And believe me, the chain breakers are many. Ladies and gentlemen, Burkina Faso is not buying weapons. Burkina Faso is buying time. Time to develop, time to invest in its people, time to stand strong enough so that future generations will never again be threatened with recodify. These drones and tanks are not just tools of war, they are shields of peace. Because peace does not come from begging oppressors to show mercy. Peace comes from strength. Peace comes from the knowledge that if you touch Burkina Faso, if you dare destabilize the Sahel again, you will face a military force equipped, ready, and unafraid. And let us not overlook the symbolism here. Turkey, a nation that has walked the road of resisting Western dominance. And China, a nation that rose from colonial humiliation to become a superpower. These are the partners Burkina Faso chose. Partners who know the taste of resistance, partners who know the price of sovereignty. Tonight, the streets of Ouagadougou are alive with celebration. Farmers, teachers, traders, soldiers all understand what this means. Mothers know their children may finally grow up without the terror of foreign-backed militias. Youth know they no longer have to flee across deserts in search of dignity, they can build it here at home. Soldiers know they can march into battle not with rusty rifles, but with the confidence of cutting-edge technology. This, my brothers and sisters, is not simply a weapons deal, it is a declaration. A declaration that Burkina Faso is here, alive, unafraid, and unstoppable.
Let us extend our gaze beyond Burkina Faso's borders, across the sands of the Sahel, where the winds of change are blowing with an intensity that no empire can control. The announcement of Burkina Faso's strategic military partnerships with Turkey and China did not echo only in Ouagadougou. No, its sound thundered across Bamako, Niamey, Conakry, and beyond. It reverberated through the villages of Mali, where elders whispered to the young, "The day of dignity has come." It traveled across the plains of Niger, where soldiers patrolling borders lifted their heads with pride. It reached as far as Senegal, Ghana, and Nigeria, where leaders are now forced to ask, are we watching history unfold? Or will we have the courage to join it? Make no mistake, Burkina Faso's leap is not isolated. It is the spark that ignites a forest fire. In Bamako, Mali's transitional government has already begun high-level discussions with Turkish defense firms, exploring joint training missions, the establishment of drone bases, and the integration of Turkish aerospace expertise. Why? Because Mali knows the days of French dominance are numbered. And they know that the Sahel alliance, the solidarity pact between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, can only survive if its members march together, armed not with dependency but with sovereignty. In Niamey, Niger's military has been closely studying the implications. Imagine this, a once landlocked, exploited nation now finding its shield in the skies, protected by the same Bayraktar drones that humbled NATO-trained armies. Niger understands that the Western-backed sanctions imposed after their bold defiance against France were never about democracy, they were about keeping Niger weak. But with Burkina Faso's example, Niger knows weakness is not destiny. Strength is possible, and do you know what terrifies the West the most? Not the tanks, not the drones, not the missiles. It is the vision of African nations forming a united security doctrine, a collective defense that does not rely on NATO, the UN, or any foreign military base. Imagine for a moment an Africa where Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey can coordinate air defenses, share intelligence, and respond to threats with their own fleets. That is the nightmare that keeps Washington and Paris awake at night. Already, diplomats in Brussels are scrambling. Reports leak daily of secret meetings where EU leaders demand to know how Turkey and China could interfere in the Sahel, yet they forget it is not interference when equals decide to cooperate. It is interference when foreign troops occupy your soil under the banner of partnership. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have chosen their allies freely. That is not interference, it is liberation. Now let us talk about the people. Across the Sahel, the ordinary farmer, herder, and trader does not care for geopolitical jargon. They care for security. They care for the right to work their land without fear of terrorists sweeping in, often armed with Western-made rifles. They care for their children to walk to school without being kidnapped or bombed. They care for sovereignty that is not abstract but lived, and when they see Burkina Faso's skies protected by Turkish drones, they feel hope. When they hear that Chinese armored vehicles now patrol the borders, they breathe relief. Do not underestimate the psychological power of this shift. For decades, Africans were told they were too poor, too weak, too divided to rise. They were told the West would always be their protector, even as that same protector looted their resources. But now, the image of a soldier stepping into a Chinese tank or a Malian officer commanding a Turkish drone destroys that lie forever. It tells Africans everywhere, we are not weak, we are not dependent, we are rising, and what of the West's reaction? Ah, their panic is delicious to witness. The United States has already summoned emergency sessions within AFRICOM, their Africa command headquartered in Germany. France is drafting new propaganda campaigns, painting, and his allies as dangerous nationalists. Britain whispers of sanctions. Yet all of these are reactions to a reality they can no longer control, because here is the truth, Africa has learned their tricks. We have seen how they impose sanctions to starve nations into submission. We have seen how they send peacekeepers who never bring peace. We have seen how they fund NGOs to manipulate public opinion. But now, none of these tactics can break nations that have chosen true partners. What use are sanctions when China offers trade? What use is propaganda when the people themselves are living the reality of sovereignty? Brothers and sisters, we must understand something deeper. The uniting of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger is not just a military pact, it is a philosophical revolution. It is the rebirth of Pan-Africanism in its purest form. Not speeches at summits, not empty slogans, but the hard steel of tanks, the buzzing wings of drones, the training of disciplined armies, and the will of people who refuse to bow. And do you know why this matters so much? Because history has shown us that sovereignty without defense is an illusion. Kwame Nkrumah taught us that political independence is meaningless without economic independence, today. And his allies are teaching us that economic independence is impossible without military strength. This is why Burkina Faso's decision resonates so powerfully. Because it corrects the weakness that toppled so many African dreams in the past. Leaders who tried to rise were assassinated, their nations destabilized, their economies sabotaged, all because they lacked the military shield to protect their visions. But not this time. This time, the shield is here, and as that shield grows, the idea of a united Sahel army is no longer fantasy, it is inevitability. Picture it. Malian and Nigerian forces training under one command, flying the same drones, using the same tanks, defending the same borders. An army not of mercenaries, but of patriots. An army that tells the world, the Sahel belongs to Africans, and Africans alone. This is why the West fears, because they know that once the Sahel secures itself, the idea will spread to Central Africa, to East Africa, to the Horn. Soon, the whole continent may awaken to the truth. We are capable of defending ourselves, and with defense comes freedom. My brothers and sisters, do you see it now? Burkina Faso's decision is not a headline, it is a turning point. It is the drumbeat of a revolution that will not stop until every inch of Africa stands tall, protected, and free.
History has a way of testing every declaration. Words, no matter how powerful, must eventually be proven on the ground. And so, after the grand announcement of Burkina Faso's military partnerships, the world waited with bated breath. Would these weapons remain a symbol, or would they be wielded as a shield? The answer came swiftly. Within weeks of the Turkish drones and Chinese armored divisions arriving in Ouagadougou, the skies above Burkina Faso changed forever. Where once fear ruled, fear of terrorist convoys sweeping through villages, fear of ambushes on lonely highways, suddenly the people saw Turkish-made Bayraktar drones patrolling. Overhead, their wings humming like guardians in the sky. And then came the first test. A militant group, long suspected of being armed through Western black markets, attempted to raid a community in the eastern province. For years, these incursions had brought death and chaos. But this time, Burkina Faso was ready. The Bayraktar took flight, locked onto the convoy, and with surgical precision, neutralized the threat before a single civilian was harmed. The people erupted with joy. For the first time in decades, the hunter had become the hunted. Mothers ululated in the streets. Elders raised their hands to the heavens. Soldiers embraced each other, knowing they were no longer powerless. And most importantly, the world was watching. From Paris to Washington, alarm bells rang. Intelligence briefings warned. Burkina Faso has demonstrated effective deployment of foreign-made drones. The balance of power in the Sahel is shifting, and shift it did. The Chinese armored vehicles, too, soon made their debut. Along the northern border, notorious smuggling networks had long evaded detection, transporting weapons and resources under the protection of international complicity. But now, troops, riding in Chinese Narinko tanks, blocked their path. For the first time, the smugglers turned back. The border was sealed not by words, but by steel. And what followed was even more significant. Mali and Niger, inspired by Burkina Faso's success, immediately requested joint training exercises. Suddenly, a new reality was unfolding, one where Sahel nations were not just defending themselves, but coordinating their strength. The first drills saw drones providing air cover while Malian troops advanced on the ground, supported by Nigerian artillery. A united Sahel force was no longer a dream. It was a reality being tested in the desert. This rattled the West more than any speech could, because unity was always the one thing they feared most. Divide and rule had been their eternal strategy, from the colonial era to today. But now, three nations once branded as weak were standing as one, their weapons synchronized, their resolve unshakable. And how did the West respond? With desperation. France, humiliated after being expelled from Ouagadougou and Niamey, rushed to propose humanitarian military missions through the unthinly veiled attempts to reinsert their troops. The United States lobbied in Brussels, demanding sanctions against Turkish defense exports to Africa. Britain quietly tried to pressure China through economic threats, warning them to reconsider destabilizing support. But it was too late, because here's the truth they cannot accept. Africa no longer fears them. Africa no longer begs for their approval. Africa has found new partners, and most importantly, Africa has found itself. Yet the Western media, unable to report this victory honestly, launched its usual smear campaign, they called a dictator, as if sovereignty itself were tyranny. They described the Turkish drones as destabilizing weapons, ignoring the decades of Western bombs dropped on African soil. They spoke of Chinese tanks as foreign interference, while remaining silent about the French bases that had occupied Africa for generations. The hypocrisy was staggering but not surprising. The people of Africa, however, saw through it, and as Burkina Faso continued its deployments, a new narrative emerged. We can protect ourselves. We can win. But every victory invites new enemies. Soon, whispers spread of shadowy forces funding new insurgencies, supplying mercenaries, and stirring conflict along Burkina Faso's borders. It was clear, the West would not retreat quietly. They would not watch their grip on Africa slip without unleashing chaos. And so, the next phase of this struggle began, not merely deploying weapons, but fortifying unity, building trust among allies, and preparing for the inevitable escalation. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger knew this was only the beginning. The West was wounded, but a wounded beast is the most dangerous. Still, the message was clear. The Sahel is no longer defenseless. The skies now belong to Africa. The borders now belong to Africa. And the future, for the first time in centuries, is being written not in Paris, not in Washington, but in Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey. Brothers and sisters, we stand at the dawn of a new era. And though storms gather, the shield of unity and sovereignty grows stronger with every day.
We have seen how the skies changed with Turkish drones, how the deserts trembled under Chinese tanks, how the Sahel stood taller with every deployment. But make no mistake, the moment Africa began to rise, the old masters began to scheme. They could not tolerate it. They could not sit in their parliaments and watch Africa defend itself with dignity. So they did what they always do. They unleashed the shadows. It began with whispers, reports of unknown militias suddenly appearing along Burkina Faso's eastern borders. They were not local fighters. No, they carried weapons fresh from European manufacturers, stamped with serial numbers that mysteriously disappeared from NATO stockpiles. These mercenaries were well-funded, well-equipped, and their only mission was chaos. The first attack came against a supply convoy carrying humanitarian aid to a village recently liberated from insurgents. These shadowy forces struck at night, hoping to remind the people of fear. But this time, fear had an answer. Drones rose into the skies, armored units surged to the rescue, and the convoy was defended. The mercenaries fled, leaving behind evidence the West did not want revealed: maps marked in English and French, encrypted radios tuned to foreign frequencies. The government of Burkina Faso exposed this too. The world, see for yourselves, they declared. These are not freedom fighters, these are mercenaries, imported chaos designed in Western capitals. But the Western media buried the truth, painting it as unverified claims. Yet the people of the Sahel were not blind. They saw the sabotage for what it was, proof that independence terrifies the West more than anything else. Still, the attacks grew bolder. Bridges sabotaged, rail lines cut, cyber attacks targeting energy grids, all with one goal: to weaken Burkina Faso's resolve, to prove that sovereignty is too costly, but did not bend. He did not panic. Instead, he responded with the calm fury of a man who knows history is on his side. He addressed his nation and the world. "Do you think we are surprised?" he asked. "Do you think we did not expect sabotage? Colonialism has always hidden behind masks. Today you call them mercenaries. Yesterday you called them missionaries. The method changes, but the intention is always the same: to keep Africa on its knees. But hear me now, we will not kneel. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." And then came the decisive move. Rather than waiting for sabotage to tear them apart, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger accelerated their military integration. A new joint command was established, headquartered in Ouagadougou. Officers from all three nations began operating under one banner, coordinating air, land, and intelligence operations. The West thought they could destabilize one nation at a time, but instead they had forged the very unity they feared most. The Turkish and Chinese advisors, too, increased their presence not as occupiers but as partners. Training centers expanded. Local engineers were taught to assemble and maintain the drones and vehicles, ensuring Africa would not only use these weapons but master their production. Within a year, plans were laid for Burkina Faso to build its own drone assembly plant. Imagine that, drones built by African hands for African skies. But as unity deepened, Western desperation turned to open threats. French officials warned of serious consequences. American generals spoke of monitoring destabilizing alliances. British newspapers screamed of a new dictatorship rising in the Sahel. But the people only laughed, because what is more destabilizing than centuries of exploitation? What is more dictatorial than forcing entire nations to use currencies they do not control? And then, the moment of truth arrived. Intelligence revealed that a large convoy of mercenaries, funded through Western channels, was moving toward a town. Their aim: to stage a massacre, blame it on the government, and justify international intervention. But the plot failed. Why? Because the Joint Sahel Command was ready. Drones tracked the convoy, armored divisions cut off escape routes, Nigerian artillery thundered, Malian infantry advanced, and forces struck with precision. The mercenaries were routed, their leaders captured alive, and when interrogations revealed their sponsors, the world gasped. Documents traced funding 2 offshore accounts linked to European intelligence agencies. The truth could no longer be hidden. Burkina Faso presented the evidence before the African Union, calling for an emergency summit. The words of echoed across the continent: "You see now that sovereignty is not just a choice, it is a battlefield, and on this battlefield, neutrality does not exist. Either you stand with Africa or you stand with those who seek to chain Africa forever." The hall erupted in applause. Delegates from across the continent nodded, some with tears in their eyes, because they knew this was bigger than Burkina Faso. This was bigger than Mali, bigger than Niger. This was the birth of an African defense doctrine. And so, brothers and sisters, the world stood at the edge of something historic. The West had tried sabotage, mercenaries, propaganda, even threats of sanctions, but nothing had broken the will of the Sahel. Instead, every attack had made it stronger, every scheme had backfired, every shadow had only revealed more light, but the struggle was not over. No, this was just the opening act of a battle that would decide whether Africa would finally break free or be dragged back into chains. The weapons were ready, the soldiers united, the people determined, and the message was clear. Africa will no longer be the playground of foreign empires. Africa will defend itself. Africa will rise.